Welcome back to Brian and the Judge. Brian Kilmeade, Judge Andrew Napolitano, 866-408-7669. Dr. Rand Paul is running for the Republican nomination for the United States Senate in Kentucky and is way ahead in the polls against the establishment candidate who has several times been elected statewide. Dr. Paul joins us now. Welcome. Welcome back to Brian and the Judge.
Good to be with you.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dr. Paul, I'm wondering, first off, does this surprise you? Does this surprise you that you're confounding the experts with your success?
Well, people ask me if I'm surprised, and I say, no, I'm astounded. There's something big going on. I thought I had stumbled across something about a year ago, April 15th. I live in a fairly small town in Bowling Green, and I was coaching my son's baseball team. And a group said, will you come down and talk to this Tea Party? And I said, yeah, I'll take time away from the game. And I went down to the square in our town, and I expected there to be 20 people there. Well, I got to the square, and there were 700 people on the square, the largest political event I've ever been to in my county. And this has happened around the state. Everywhere I've gone around the state, the largest rallies, bigger than any Republican rallies, have all been Tea Party events. And initially people said, oh, these are just being supported by some network. You guys may have heard of that network. But, it wasn't that way. Most of these were not supported by the network. There were no famous people there. They were just people there that are really worried about their country.
How do you explain the phenomenon which is supported by this evidence? I mean, you were many points behind against your opponent, who's the establishment Republican candidate who's been elected statewide before. Now you're 15 to 18 to 20 points ahead of him. He's got the endorsement of the major Republican apparatus in your state. In Florida, not far from you, Marco Rubio, whose views are similar to yours, chased the incumbent Republican governor out of the race. In Utah, a sitting state senator, a U.S. senator who called himself a conservative Republican for 18 years, denied renomination by the Republican Party. Is there a battle going on for the heart and soul of the Republican Party? And at least with respect to those wars that have been fought so far, are the small government Republicans winning?
Yes, and I tell people it's kind of like what Jefferson said about the Republic. Jefferson said that each generation will have to renew its defense of liberty. I think each generation, the political party, has to renew itself and has to redefine itself. But, I think it's been going on. When I was a kid, I went to the 1976 convention when it was Reagan versus Ford, and there was no more establishment Republican than Ford. Reagan at that time was the outsider, and the party was almost evenly split. You get to 1980, Reagan wins again with a fairly split party, and since then, everybody wants to be a Reagan Republican. But I think what happened is somewhere along the way, we all became conservative, but the term lost its value. It lost its meaning because it turned out when Republicans were in power, we weren't fiscal conservatives, and when Republicans were in power, we got things like the bank bailout. I go around the state of Kentucky, and I'm not afraid to say this in every venue, every Republican venue. I say, look, our platform says we don't believe in bailing out private businesses, much less owning private businesses, and that it was inconsistent with our platform. And I think that's what's resonating. I'm a truth teller in a time in which you have so many politicians who want to pander back and forth, and they're afraid to say a bank bailout was wrong. And that's what's coming. The Tea Party tidal wave has a lot to do with that bank bailout vote, and they said that when they talked about Bennett losing, it was his vote for the bank bailout that was a big decider.
And I think Rand, too, you could factor in that people just are tired of seeing the same politicians do the same thing over and over again. Are you getting that sense? I mean, after what happened with Utah, after what happened last night in West Virginia with the Democrat?
Right. And I go around and I actually go into every community and say, look, if you want a federal project, I'm the wrong guy. I say we're out of money, and I'm going to say that, look, we bring in $2.4 trillion. Let's spend $2.4 trillion. So we will repair roads. We will repair bridges. But if you want someone just to grab up federal money as if there's no end in sight, those times are coming to an end, and anybody can do that. What you really want is someone who will stand up to the huge budget problems we have and say, enough's enough, we're out of money. Interest alone on the debt is $383 billion. We're spending more now in interest than we are for all the roads in the country. So really, debt is crowding out some of the things that people would like from government. Debt is now going to crowd out some of those programs.
if you were currently representing Kentucky in the Senate, would you vote to confirm Elena Kagan to the United States Senate, or because you reject your perception of her ideological and philosophical views of the role of the Constitution in our lives, or would you take the position the president is a Democrat, the president's entitled to nominate who he wants as long as on her face she's qualified, she's entitled to the job?
Well, what I would do is ask some tough questions. I would ask her about the Commerce Clause. I would ask her what she thinks of Wickard v. Filburn. I think that big government is being driven through the Commerce Clause, and they use it to justify everything, and I'd want to know what her opinion is on that. Now, I'm not sure you can get an opinion from an appointee anymore. It's interesting that she has written and said that the appointees need to tell us more about what they believe, and that to me is one of the most important questions I would ask is what she thinks of the Commerce Clause. Does she think it justifies the health care bill? Does she think the federal government has the right to force people to buy insurance? So I think those are the questions I would ask. I'm not sure I'll get answers, but I'd want to know where she's coming from on those issues. And I think the Senate does get to advise and consent, and I wouldn't prejudge it and say I'm going to vote against her or for her at this point, but I would want to ask some tough questions.
To Dr. Paul, on top of that, there's another interesting debate, and that is with immigration. Where do you stand on Arizona's law? You think it's unfounded, unconstitutional? Is it are you a believer?
I believe that the federal government needs to control the borders, and the federal government is failing in that. I agree with Milton Friedman when he said you can't have open borders in a welfare state. And so what's happening is the states have all the mandates. The states have to pay for all these programs. The states are paying for the hospital and the Medicaid and all these programs, the education, and the states are at the point where they can't pay for them anymore. So now the states are stepping up. So I think the states do have a role in this, but they have a role in it mainly because the federal government's not been doing anything. I think that the way I understand the Arizona law, and I haven't seen all the details of it, but the way I understand it is it's for a secondary violation. If you're picked up on a primary violation, they can then ask at some point to prove your citizenship. I think it's reasonable if you go to public school in this country to have to produce a paper saying that you're in the country legally. I think if you're going for elective health care at a government clinic, it's reasonable to ask for proof of citizenship. So I think there are ways of doing it, and whether or not it's the right way, that's sort of for Arizona to decide, I think, in the sense that I do believe states can make these decisions based on, whether or not they want to give taxpayer funds to the folks.
Dr. Paul, thanks very much for joining us. Come back and visit us, please, after the primary in Kentucky.
Thank you, Judge.
Brian, he's running against the guy who's in charge of counting the votes. Imagine that. Your opponent gets to count the votes.
I think as long as we're in the USA, I think we're
Jersey,
okay.
They don't do that. 866-408-7669. Right back with you on Brian and the Judge.